Hello YouTube vintage stereo collectors. So next up on the bench is a Kenwood KA-2002a. And I haven't been seeing as many of these around lately. They're pretty popular. I would say for every KA-2000a that I see, well, there's about maybe 5 of those to one of these. This was the next generation. And so we're talking, I believe these came out in 71. For the 72 model year. And this amp is in many ways the same as a KA-2008, and if you've owned both, it has the same sonic characteristics. There's a few minor improvements in engineering and a totally different build. First of all, the KA-2008 is sort of short at the front, longer at the back. This is getting closer to the standard of, how do you put it, the 17-inch standard width, but it's not 17-inch. It's actually hair over 12 and a half, but it's still a very compact unit, and which makes it easy to slide in somewhere on the shelf. And this one actually has the gray lid and the wood, the walnut sideburns, which are pretty cool. Really has that era. I call these the Dr. Kelly bracket sideburns from the guy, you know, the emergency doctor on Emergency. I wanted to talk more about the engineering. So all I've done on this one is basically I plugged it in and tried it. Nothing's overheating. It does work on both channels. Controls are kind of crackly. In fact, they're pretty stiff, including the power button. But this has been sitting, not used much. In fact, one of the things that I look for, to unplug it, is residue under controls. Nothing. Now if you use contact cleaner that doesn't have a lube in it, it will disappear. But there's always a little bit of grime underneath them. Let's talk about the engineering of this. This is almost the perfect unit to service. And here's why. First of all, everything's out in the open, which is kind of cool. All the controls are individually mounted and wired. They're not on a printed circuit board except for the 3 buttons, the loudness, the mono stereo, and the tape monitor, these 3 here, which are kind of loose. They actually, the screws back out a bit, but I'm going to take the faceplate off later to clean it. The other neat thing is, it has a nice service portal that gets you to the entire underside of the main board. And if you look at this era on other brands, like whether it's a Yamaha or whatever, where you had multiple boards, they're moving more to one main board. And which is actually a good idea in some respects for ease of manufacture and serviceability, but they're easier to crack. Now this one's actually clipped down on one side and screwed down on the other. And just for fun, one little tip on these, run into this before. Weird little hum you can't find. Tighten those 2 screws, and then the one over here under the cables. They're a little bit loose. That's how one of the ways this board gets its ground. It has a few things left over from the point-to-point era in it. The 2 speaker output coupling capacitors are right there. Little harder to get out. You just have to move the bundle over. This is on its own little separate board. There's an added fuse holder here. It's for the dial lamp. It's actually not for the main winding of the power transformer. The other fuse is on the back, which is for the 120 volt line. It has 2 phono inputs, 2 Neurox, tape recorder with a DIN plug, and 1 pair of speakers that's switched with a headphone jack. So that's very similar to the KA-2000. Another engineering thing, slightly better transformer. Still a 2200 microfarad cap. And it actually goes over to this 500 over here. So the only cap that's clamp mounted is the main one. It's not leaking anything. It's not getting hot. When you have it plugged in and you turn the amp off, it still has a little bit of residual in it, so it is doing something. There's actually no hum on this one. Very, very quiet, no noise floor. But I'm serious, I actually had it in the auxiliary, put it up about halfway, there wasn't even any hiss. Then I ran a signal through and realized the volume control's got a little bit of crackle going. And they're all kind of stiff. This is what I mean about serviceability. These were engineered for service. Look at boop, boop. This is the kind of stuff I used to like that would come into the shop years ago when we were doing flat rate repairs. There, you just all the rotary controls just by taking the lid off. I'm using neutral 401B original formula, when you shouldn't breathe or touch. And this has some features of higher ended Kenwoods at the time, such as detented bass and treble. Balance has a center detent. Oh, that's better. Give the selector a bit. Doesn't take much to loosen these up. Getting at these is actually very easy. Those small switches, the back is open on them. Just put the little, and just go very, very light on these. Sorry, my arm's in the way. Very, very light on these. Work the bit. In all of these that I worked on, I worked on like the 4002, the 4006, and this is the baby of the series. In all these that I worked on, I've never had to replace a control. Oddly enough, it has ALPS controls. The only thing that's an issue on these, let's bring it up, swing it around. The power switch. I've had a few with bad power switches, and I look and I go, wait a minute, that's not the original power switch. I'm going to get a little more light on this. That's been changed. The soldering, at the factory there's actually a little piece of vinyl over the connection so you can't touch it. That's been changed, which is good actually, because first of all, very hard to get a switch that fits this and fits the case and has two, and there's basically a 120 voltage switch and then a muting circuit. So that does need a little bit of lube though. I've had them where they stick in. This one you have to kind of go in the front, a little shot. If it works, it's not arcing or smoking, leave it in. But I've noticed, I think the last two of these that I did, both I had to source switches. Anyway, another thing about the engineering on this, there's less solder connections. They've got these stakes, they use a wire wrap gun. We used to call it a zip gun. They actually used to use these in the telephone exchanges in the same era. And then, so for instance, it wraps it very tight, then you had a tool that unwrapped it, then you took a little bit off when you put it back on until eventually you had to replace the wire because it was too short. The controls and stuff are all soldered. The only thing about this, I don't think this lasted that long. Think about it. Okay, that wire, so that one's been soldered, but that wire that's wrapped, that does save a solder. Oh no, it doesn't, because there's one on the other side. Like, I'll just take this. I was listening to it. See, they're soldered over here and along here, and sometimes they get weak. I think actually that one's been. These have been resoldered. This is in the bias network, the output transistors. Sometimes they were very thin on the solder. The board was wave soldered. But what's kind of neat about this one, as far as serviceability goes, I'm going to recap it, and you can basically unsolder, wiggle out, take out a few caps at a time. You flip it up, clean the board a bit, stick the new ones in, flip it down. It's not exceptionally heavy. You're not wrestling 30 pounds to the ground and up again. Another thing you might want to give a squirt ahead of time on is the bias controls. And this does not have a center voltage control or a protection level control like the earlier series. It's set by a resistor right there. Hey, look at that. That one's been changed. Isn't that interesting? So they may actually have new outputs. You can't really see. The outputs are on this flange right here, and the KA-2002s, I believe, one or two of those may have been changed. That resistor definitely has. That sets the center voltage. Well, I'm going to check it. I'm going to check all the outputs, make sure they have grease on them, and then check the voltages on them. It's had a couple little minor things done to it. When you think about how old this is, that's nothing. Very little service. My plan is I will replace this cap, the oil caps, the snubber caps across the diodes. And it's actually a very easy unit to recap. Like, it's very accessible, except there's a little bit of glue on some of the bigger ones. Put a couple of 1500s in there. It should be really, really nice to listen to. May not, oh, hey, look at that. I'm looking at this in detail for the first time, so there's C458, C458 there. There's 4 of them. And the first 2 in the phone section, they've been replaced too. Huh. So this has had probably noisy phono, which was C458 would cause. Well, okay, getting to learn a little bit more about this one. And that's one of those things you gotta kind of, when you restore one, you need to kind of learn the quirks and what it's been through, It's sort of like a relationship in a way. You talk about the good things, you talk about the knocks you've taken. These are actually, you might think it's too low power and whatever, not worth restoring. When you hear one of these run, and what's nice about this, when they re-engineer the output, soft start, there's no relay to fail. Soft start, it comes on with it's just a whisper when it turns on. And these have incredible bass. The last one I had it set up with a couple of PSB monitor speakers, and I was listening to a Leonard Cohen disc, one of his last ones. I think it's I Want It Dark or I Want It Darker, one of those. And the voice and the upright bass were coming through on it, and it was at low volume, the loudness wasn't even on. The volume, like the treble and bass, at 0. I couldn't believe how well it functioned. But at that time, when they were building these, a lot of features and engineering of the higher models were in the entry-level models. There wasn't anything cheap about these. Anyway, thanks for watching and listening. When I get more into it, I'll drop by and show you what I've done. Thanks.